Hey, it's Anjan Software. Today I would like to talk about one other idea how to try to escape from the CRUD architecture. And this technique is based on polymorphism, so how to get from CRUD to polymorphism. And in order to make it work nicely with polymorphism, there are some building blocks required. And I think there are three of them. It's service objects, repository, and entities. So once we have those building blocks, so once we have applied the refactoring, which in a CRUD application or in some kind of framework like Rails, for example, usually in the controller, you just call the active record model directly. So the idea here is to first introduce a service object. So for every operation that changes the state, you introduce a service object, which is basically something between the controller and the model. Then you introduce the repository. So in the service object, you can say repository.load project, and it will return the project object, and you can then apply changes on the project object. And then you can apply entities pattern, which is to create something that you could say it's a domain class. So it's no longer an active record model class. Then active record class is only used for persistence, but entities, they represent what we could say the model now, but they don't know nothing about persistence. So repository can say repository.load project, and you get an instance of a project entity. So it's not an active record class, it's just a pure normal Ruby object. And then you can make some changes, and then you can say repository.save project, and it knows how to persist this project. Maybe using active record, probably so. So let's say you have this structure already in place, and you have a method on the project class which is called do something. And do something has no rules. Everyone, like each call to this method is successful. It just changes some state. But let's say you have now a new rule. You can only do something on the project if the project is active. And now the obvious way of doing this would be to implement a boolean flag. Then you have a project.activate method. And when the project.activate method is called, you set this flag to true, so active equals true. And then when the do something method is called, you say something like, I don't know, raise exception if it is active, or yeah. So if it's active, you can't do it, for example, or the other way around. But you know what's going on. So that would be a way of dealing it with Boolean flags, and that will probably work, and that's quite okay. With polymorphism, you would go with another approach, and you would now see that actually you have two different kinds of objects, but they do have a very similar interface. So you have something like active project and something like inactive project. Maybe inactive project is still what used to be the project. So maybe you just need a new class, one class. Maybe you need to have those two new classes and get rid of the project class. Maybe you can use inheritance here, but I'm not relying on inheritance here. And I'm talking mostly about from a perspective from a dynamic language point of view. So this is where duck typing comes into play. We don't use interfaces, but we rely on interfaces implicitly. So what we do, we would have those entities. So at the active record level, you still have only one project class. It's enough because that's how it's persisted. And at the table level, you still have this Boolean flag. So at the persistent level, nothing changes. The only place where we change something is that now we introduce those two classes. So we have active project and inactive project. And those two classes have different implementation of the do something method. So the active project, for the do something method, it does the stuff successfully. And the inactive project has just a one-liner implementation, which is raise exception, because it's not possible for inactive project to do this action. And in order for this to work, you now have to move the responsibility somewhere. Who's responsible for returning us the right object, inactive or active project? And this is the repository. Repository is the object that knows about the database level, can see the fields, and can build objects. In a way, repository can be seen as a factory, but it's not really a factory. It's just something that can map from the database to an object. So in the repository, you would have probably something like a load project method, maybe save project too. So the load project method accepts some kind of ID, and it knows how to talk to active record to get data from the database. And now it has just one change now. It checks the value of this Boolean column So if it's active, we return an instance of the active project. If it's inactive, then we return an instance of the inactive project. And that's basically it, because now you can deal with those entities, and the repository.save method should actually be the same, and nothing changes there. And now you have polymorphism in play. So now you can just, from the service object point of view, you are not aware what is the instance. You just say, in the service object, you just say project.do something. And you just rely on the fact that you have the right project, and it keeps, it knows the rules. And by using this pattern, you are removing one of the if statements here. And this is obviously kind of overkill for one thing, but if you can imagine more Boolean flags, then this is a nice way of dealing with the state changes. So you have basically one class representing each state of your project. With Boolean approach, you have just two states, so that's easy. But the same rule cannot be applied for situations where you have an object in multiple states, using some kind of strings to determine that, or some kind of enum. But the same rule applies here. You just, at the repository level, you choose and instantiate a different class. And that's it, I think. Thanks for listening.